I'm not going to talk a great deal about permanence. Lots of other people are as the afternoon goes on, but really, as Renica has indicated, I'm currently the Vice President of ADCS, and in April will become the President. So I'm going to try and talk to you a bit about leadership of children's services, and I'll come on and say a bit more about that. So here I am. I looked really kind of relaxed and happy there, don't you think? That was I'd arrived in Essex, and I'll tell you a bit about the Essex story inevitably as we go along. And they said you must have some lovely photos taken, so they got this professional photographer. So I think that was 2 weeks in. That was 6 months in. Why does that appear? Because one of the things I suppose I want to say something about this afternoon, and we will leave some time for questions, and Renica will wave at me if I'm going terribly over, is something about courage. Because you remember the problem with the lion and the Wizard of Oz, he had no courage, and he didn't, he wanted to go to the Emerald City to get some courage. And I do think the times in which we live are going to take quite a lot of courage to face up to some of the issues we need to be addressing. So, yeah, he looks slightly better than I do actually, I think. So the sort of bit that Renica has asked me to talk about really is about culture and leadership that support quality services in the UK. And I'm sort of going to do two things really. I'll go into some detail, but I'm going to talk mostly about creating the conditions for success and how one allows for the things that need to be present if you are going to make really sound decisions about children, whether it's about permanence or many other things. And I've just rediscovered that second bullet point there recently. And I really like this thing about the fact that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think it's a great saying. And much of what I will say to you is about creating a culture. Of course we have a strategy, and somebody this morning sent me the new version of the Essex Children Young People's strategy, and at the end of it they put it's really interesting, and I sent an email back saying no, it's really not. It's important. We need one. You kind of need to know where you're going, but actually the thing that gets you there is mostly about the culture in the organisation. So I'm going to try and say some things about all of that. And I really like this Peter Singh quote, which I've been carrying around with me for a few years and occasionally bringing out when I speak. And it says, once you begin to master team learning and systems thinking, it's very difficult to play the old game of optimising your position at the expense of the whole. And I just think there's a set of messages there, which is that the services within a local authority, the services run by the voluntary sector, such as Coram, you absolutely have to, think about the way that things connect together. And the moment you find yourself in a position in which you try to fix that bit of the system, take it from me, some other bit of the system will drag you down. So there's something about thinking about the whole system, and it can be quite hard, because sometimes your brain just doesn't feel big enough to be thinking about everything. But I do think it's a really important point. So I thought I'd just say something about what I think some of the context and national challenges are. I think social work, the challenge of social work, I think we are at a crossroads. I would want to say to you that I spent last evening actually very close by here. The people found King's Place. It's next to part of the Guardian now. And last night was the dinner, the final dinner, the wake for the College of Social Work. So I spent myself at it was a lovely restaurant actually, if anybody gets together. It's the Rotunda restaurant in King's Place. But the College of Social Work will finally end in the next day or so. And it was the dinner with everybody last night. And I think we do find ourselves at a crossroads. I'm not quite sure what government thinks about what social work ought to be like in the future. And, one of the things that's really struck me through this period where we've been trying to do some important things is that I think we are deeply ambivalent about success. our own success. There's something in social workers that I think struggle to want to be really successful. And I've sort of really felt that with the college. And obviously, the reason we need to do well is for the users of the service and for the children, and this idea that Rinneke said so strongly and is so important, that the child and the young person and their families need to be in the centre of our thinking. And you know, one of the things that I kind of think about, because as Rinneke said, we trained at the Tavistock, so we were all programmed to think in a slightly different way, I suppose, through that experience. And I think one of the things that's got to happen, it happens with schools actually a lot in my experience, is that we can either internalise the pain and the frustration and the lack of hope that some of the people, some of the children, some of the families bring, and we can just become a mirror back, or we can become a beacon. We can actually sort of reflect something back which is about possibility and change. And ironically, social workers often find it harder to change than the people that they're trying to help. And all, you know, I'm saying the obvious, I know you know this, but and schools do it. Actually, I when I first went to Essex, I went to Basildon. People may know Basildon, and I went to one school, and it was an outstanding school. And I said to the head teacher, "So what makes it an outstanding school?" And she said, "Because the kids locally are not getting a great deal in their families. There's not a lot of kind of aspiration in Basildon. And so I'm here to reflect back hope and possibility and be a beacon in the community." And on the same day I went along the road to another school. It was less than half a mile away, and it was a school that was really struggling. And the head teacher said to me, "You wouldn't expect us to be doing very well because it is Basildon." As if to say children in Basildon deserve something rather less than other children. So there's something for me about how we represent the possibility of change and hope, and be a beacon, not a mirror. I'm afraid financial adversity is here to stay. I think the really interesting thing is that there's nobody old enough here to remember 97, is there? You must all be far younger than that. So. Do you remember New Labour got in 97, and there was rather a lot of money came into children's services, about between a quarter and a third, probably extra funding came. And you know, I think we squandered some of that money. I think we had lots of really good ideas and we did them all. And some of them were great, but some of them probably weren't great. And I regret some of that. I was in Tower Hamlets in that period, but I think what is happening in adversity financially is that we are beginning to get more thoughtful and more innovative. Actually, it's making people think that if you're going to spend money on anything, it's got to be research-driven, evaluation-driven, it's got to work, because frankly, we can't afford to waste money. And I do think Professor Monroe, I wanted to reference Professor Monroe's work, and part of the Essex journey, as I'll tell you, is about prevention and early intervention. And I do think it's central to the agenda, not just because we owe it to the people that we try and serve, but actually because the money works better if you can help people at the first point of an issue rather than waiting effectively until their world has come to a sort of really difficult moment. And I like this stuff about, do people know about courageous, there's lots of literature on courageous conversations, which is the link back to the lion, really. So I really like this quote, and I try and remember it at work. So you've got to say what needs to be said. I mean, social workers have to do that every day. People working around Permanence, of course, do as well. So I like the phrase. It says, "For the purpose of leadership, courage is defined as a reconciliation of the consequence of failure. A courageous conversation is then the interaction between people when the leader has defined the consequences of failure and is all right with the potential risks." So we work in a risk world. In the corporate centre where I work, it's as if somebody about 3 years ago discovered risk management, and we spend our entire life risk managing everything. Do you do that? You know. Well, if you're a social worker, that's what you do. It's always what we've done. We've managed risk, and we've taken professional judgments to manage risk. And I think we've got to kind of return to some of that. So some courageous conversations need to be had. with government too. So the conditions for success, and I won't read all of these out, I may just sort of focus on one or two, but it seems to me that, and I took a risk when I was interviewed, I'd been a director of Children's Services twice, and when I was interviewed at Essex in 2010, I got halfway through the interview with the members and it struck me that they might think that my coming as a leader to their organisation was going to be the only thing that was going to sort it out. And I took this risk in the middle of the interview and I said to the leader of the council that I was worried that he was giving the impression that it was all about my leadership, and actually if we wanted to sort things out, and I'll tell you how bad it was in a sec, everybody needed to lead, the leader of the council, the chief executive, all of the members. If I was going to do work in Essex, and Stephanie's here and has been part of that journey, I needed about another 10 or 15 people working with me. And those conditions, so what are the key ones? I do think this one here, articulating visions and values, I think is really important to social work. I do think, as I've said, a whole systems approach is key. But also, I've lost the one on caseloads, is it at the top there? Yeah, workers with manageable workloads that are regularly reviewed. When I arrived in Essex, I toured the offices and I spoke to social workers, and mostly people had about 35 cases. So I said to social workers, could you just tell me the names of all the children in your caseload? And nobody got much beyond about 12. So they couldn't even remember the names of 35 children. I'm not being critical, I mean, nor can I. Caseloads commonly now run between 12 and 15. And if you're going to do proper social work to equality with children, and I'll come on to talk about relations-based social work in a sec, you have to have a manageable world that you can deal with. So I won't go through all of those, but I think presumably these slides can go out after the event for people. And again, I'm not going to go through all of those either. You can, some of these will be things that you'll know ever so well. Wishes, feelings and experiences placed at the centre, a range of services, risk I've mentioned already. But what I would say, in particular, just the last one, which actually goes a bit beyond feedback from children. It goes into, we've been doing some fabulous work using ethnography. Do people know about ethnography? So we've been working with children and adults with learning disabilities. We're just doing a major piece with older people, understanding deeply and intensively their experience of the world and public services. And it's fun for them. They get to make a video, they get to write their story. And then we place that story in the centre of our service planning. So this isn't just a bit of feedback after your contact with social services. This is deep, deep understanding. If anybody's interested, I can send you the stuff on ethnography, but it's a really interesting approach to designing services. Oh. I just couldn't resist it, really. And is there anybody from Hackney here? That's good. I can say whatever I want then. I was going to be slightly. No, sorry. I wasn't going to be rude about Hackney. I was going to say this: is that we've got an approach in Essex, which I'll say just a little about in a second. It served us really well. So the story was, in 2010 and 2009, Essex had been found inadequate on 2 occasions. I thought that was all part of getting the children inside the conversation, actually. The council had been found inadequate twice on the Ofsted, various Ofsted inspections, and it was pretty grim, wasn't it, Stephanie, when Stephanie lived through this. And it's interesting because the one bit of the service that was always fantastic was the Permanence service, actually, and that was probably down to Stephanie and her staff. But there were 2,000 unallocated child protection cases when I arrived. And we couldn't get any social workers. And we'd really got ourselves in a terrible muddle. And it's a really big place. So once it's in a muddle, it takes a bit of turning around, really. And I suppose what I wanted to say about The Only Way Isn't Essex is we've had a staggeringly kind of interesting journey over 5 years, and we were seen as being good and outstanding. Not that I really care. Is anybody from Ofsted here? Not that I really care remotely what Ofsted think, actually. I say this over and over. My staff think I'm all mad. What matters is what we think. What matters is what the staff in Essex do to get fantastic services for children. And once in a while, Ofsted turn up. And it's free consultancy for a few weeks. I mean, it'd be good if it was only a week, wouldn't it, rather than 4. But, it's just a moment in time where some other people come and take a look at your service. And I now have colleagues who sit by the phone on the given day of the Ofsted inspections waiting for the call. It's the world gone mad, in my view. And I shall say it a lot when I'm the president next year. But the point I was trying to get at is that the Hackney model of reclaiming social work, I was the assistant director in Tower Hamlets from 2000 to 2005. And I used to have a regular meeting with Steve Goodman, who now runs Morning Lane Associates, but was the AD at Hackney then. And I used to also meet with Romy Bowen, who was, an eminent Director of Children's Services at Southwark. And we just used to get together once a month and we used to talk about what we were doing. And Tower Hamlets had a really good run. And I'd learn a bit from Romy and I'd learn a bit from Steve. And Steve was designing Reclaiming Social Work. It wasn't called that then. It was all about how they were trying to take a service in Hackney and make it much, much better. And then more recently, we've seen, I don't want to, I'm not just picking on these people, there are lots of good authorities actually around the country, but Leeds have just had a really good moment with Ofsted. They've been found as good and outstanding. And Nigel Richardson, who is a fantastic Director of Children's Services there, has come at it from an angle of restorative, the whole approach of kind of restorative, and they call it child-friendly Leeds. And it's fantastic. Get a chance to hear Nigel speak or read the material. It's inspiring. And the point I'm trying to make is there isn't one model that you need to take. And I think there was a real problem. Once Hackney had done their work and done really well on the Reclaiming Social Work agenda, others said, if we structure in the same way as Hackney, somehow our services will all improve. And there's about 5 authorities around the country now deconstructing Reclaiming Social Work. That's not Hackney's fault. But of course, the words and the culture that they have sort of imbued in the Hackney model is a combination of many things, and the Reclaiming Social Work is just the icing on the cake at the end. And there is not one way of doing it. And so the Essex story is great, but it's not the only way of doing it. So the only way is not Essex. Incidentally, when I was interviewed at Essex, I got interviewed by a group of children and young people, and you know what it's like when they do that? So they ask you really difficult questions. And they said to me, they said, quite aggressive actually. I was sort of a bit, the members' interview was easy, but the kids were really difficult. And they said, tell me what the top 10 things that children in Essex are concerned about. Okay, so bullying, yeah, bullying, drugs. Number 1 in Essex, number 1 is the image that is portrayed by Towie. And they said, if you get the job, we want you to contact the producers and we want them down here. And we are going to tell them that is not the image of children in Essex, right? Would they come? Would they hell? I wrote to them. I was as good as my word. Never managed to get them down to see us. But so, yeah, the only way is in Essex. So, we've used, just a bit of sort of conceptual background, we've used this, which is some of you may know, is the Mckinsey 7S model. So it's got structure, strategy, systems, skills, staff style, and shared values. And we've just deliberately used that as a way of talking to our managers about what we're trying to do. Clearly, I'm not going to read all of that out. But I want to mention just one, which is over in style, role generosity. The capacity for people working in your organisation to step out of their ordinary role and be generous with other people in the organisation and help them and support them. If there was one thing I had to choose, that's made for us an absolutely huge difference. I won't go on about the Windscreen of Lead, but if I were to say to you that is a model, a conceptual model we've used about trying to get as much stuff down this end in universal and additional, and as little stuff down the other end. I'll come on and say briefly some of the things that we've achieved, but we also mapped the resources onto that thing, and we saw over time as we began to move into an early intervention and prevention model that all the money was being spent up the top end, and now if you look at the budget, much of it is now spent sort of to the middle, down into the bottom end of that graph. I mean, lots of people use that, and it's not any great wowy thing, but we've actually used that as a sort of way of thinking. It's up on most people's walls, you know, and it helps you just have a sort of conceptual framework. And I really like this this quote, which I guess really is about tolerating different approaches, but it's a really, he's also terribly distinguished looking, and he's got much more hair than I have as well, but so the right word may be effective, but no word was ever effective as a rightly timed pause. I just think, how did he think of that? You know, I sort of, if I could just do that once, I'd retire and never do anything again. But something about the ability to pause and listen and be reflective, I think, has been part of our journey. So just a bit about, we've called it, you know, we talk about relations-based social work. We ripped people from in front of computers, and we took most of the screens out of our recording system so that social workers were encouraged to meet children every day. As Stephanie will know, the first line of our Ofsted inspection report last year, not that I care what they say, of course, it was that social workers in Essex know their children and take time to listen and see the children on a very regular basis. Words to that effect. I would have taken that. I didn't care what the outcome was. That was good enough for me, because we've tried to get people back to a sense of actually the human engagement that goes with all that. I won't talk through all of these things. Maybe just something about home visits. So we spend a vast amount of time talking about what is a home visit, what are the emotions that are engendered in social workers when you turn up to do a visit and are confronted, maybe a child protection visit or something, and you're confronted with 2 Rottweiler dogs. I have a fear and loathing of dogs, actually, so I wouldn't even get through the door personally. But so when that happens and your focus is about finding out whether a child is safe, and there are 2 very aggressive dogs who are sort of jumping up at you, how does that make you feel? How do you get over the boundary? When you've got over the boundary, how do you think about your feelings in the situation in which you find yourself? It's thoughtful, reflective, sort of relations-based social work. So it's just another quote. I won't read it out, but you can see. It's a Daniel Turney from University of Bristol, but I just think that's what social workers are there to do. Whether you're doing a piece of permanence planning, whether you're working with a child looked after, whether you're doing a piece of child protection work. The tools that you bring to the job are about human relationships. So again, I won't go through all of this. We'll send it out to you. You can have a read of it. But our motto is sort of serious about social work, because Hackney had already nicked reclaiming social work, so we had to think of something else. But it's all about relations-based practice, and I suppose the point about all of that is that the staff who work in the department have become very clear, and I think if Stephanie and I and Helen Link and all the other wonderful people that work for Essex were to walk away, I'm guessing now that people are so attached to this way of working it wouldn't all fall by the wayside. So it's become the cultural norm about how we do the work. And again, a Donald Forrester quote, which I also really like, which is about motivational social work and the way that you do the work, really. I just think if I was an inspector, I'd just look at supervision. It would be the one thing that I would put up in front of anything else. Is it a place where you can be emotionally informed and think? Does it support you? Does it help you make brave but risk-based, sensible decision making? And if you're not doing that in supervision, then I think you're in deep trouble. And I know there are departments around the country where supervision is an occasional luxury. Well, in Essex it isn't. It's a way, it's part of the way that we do the work now. So just really quickly, the story in Essex in between 2010 and now. So it's my 5th birthday next week, actually, in Essex, is that we've got many less children in care. We've taken a much different approach to the way that we manage risk. We had Not that I'm obsessive about it, but we had 1,615 children on the day I arrived. And we've got about 1,000 children now, so we've reduced the numbers of children by 600. We didn't just stop them coming in, by the way. We've adopted lots of children and found permanence for lots of children. We have a whole range of terrific services that work with children to keep them in their own families. So it's not just being sort of tough at the front door. In terms of child protection plans, I think there were 1,400 children on child protection plans in 2010. It's about 650, it bubbled around a bit, but so we've more than half the number of child protection plans. And the caseload stuff I've already referenced, we've gone from 30s to low teens. And the reason, as I've said, we've done that is that we've got a whole series of services. We put a rather boringly titled service called DBIT. It's about keeping children out of the care system at the point when there is a crisis. And again, we're sort of promoting this idea of direct work and relations-based work, and we created 80 posts at the beginning of that process to work with it, and we asked our internal staff only who wanted to opt to be in the teams. And I think we had 180 applications. And they were interested because they all said, we came into social work to work with people, and we're really interested in being in these teams because they're going to work all day long with children. And that's what we think we sort of came into work to do. We've reduced costs massively. You don't have to be a genius to work out that 600 kids at 50k a go saves you 36 million or something. And I just did a little deal with the leader of the council, and the little deal was that for every pound I saved, he would give me back 33p, and I could invest it in early intervention. He hasn't always kept his side of the deal, but he has pretty much, actually. So we've been able to invest, and we did some clever stuff with social impact bonds, which I won't bore you with. So that's our story. I think I've probably said most of that, and that's me. So just by way of summary, I think we need to be courageous in the way that we're going to approach children's social work over the next coming years. I think we have no choice. I think the thing that strikes me about all of that stuff, whether you like the approach or don't like the approach, what every service needs is a strong underpinning of a sort of philosophy, a set of values, some theoretical frameworks. Social work works best when those things are present and in place. We will innovate, we will need to continue to innovate because the money is going to get worse, not better. And I can't see any year in the next number that are coming where the money is going to get better. So that's just here to stay. And then lastly, we've tried really strongly to focus on the journey of the child in Essex. We do take the Professor Munro work very, very seriously. We do think that is the heart of all that we do. So I could go on for about another 4 hours, but I'll stop there.